On today's CSS tutorial, what we're going to be talking about is how to make this panning effect. So when I move my mouse around the page, you'll see that these images and this layout follows us around. So if we go in the right in the bottom corner or right in the top right, we'll see this moving around. So how do we go about doing this? We're going to do this in 3 steps. The first step is we're going to set up our code from the project just to be ready for this movement. The second step is we'll add some JavaScript, so when we move our mouse from the left to the right or the top or the bottom, we'll move this whole area around the page. And the third part is we'll add some smoothing, because if we move our mouse around the page very quickly, we don't want to make our users dizzy. So this is what we're going to do on today's CSS tutorial. So I've just started out this project with a very simple structure. So what I have in my HTML at the moment is a header tag up here, which has a H1 and a link tag. And then below it, this is basically just a section with a grid. So I've got a section tag and then 12 images below it. In my style, again, I've got some basic setup like some typography. I've got my header that's fixed above this with a layout. I've got my link, which has this underline effect. And what I have is a section.panner, which is a class name I've just added in here, just to kind of know which section we're talking about, to be this layout. So currently this is a grid layout, 2 columns of equal size, grid gap between them, which is 48, and a padding around the edge of 48 as well. Then below, I've just got a media query just to kind of lay this out. Now what we want to do is basically make this whole area inside here pannable. So how do we go about doing this? Well, essentially what we want to do is take the content out of our section tag and let it move around. So at the moment, if we go back to our index.html, there's just one thing in here, which is this section tag. And basically what we want to do is have a way to move all of these images around. So what I'm going to do around this content is add a new tag. Now this tag, I'm just going to add as a div tag, and let's give this one a class. Let's say this is the world. It's going to pan around the world. And I'm going to take these images and put them all inside. Now this will break some of our layout. And again, I'll just indent this to make it a little bit easier to read. You'll see here that now my grid is broken. So the first thing I'm going to do is fix that grid. So essentially what I want to do in my style.css is move my grid layout from this section.panner, which is the outside layer, onto my new thing, which is this div.world. Div.world. So essentially what we've just done is we have the same kind of effect. So here, if I scroll up and down the page, it looks the same as before. But what I want to start to do now is I want to play around with this layout. Now, what I want to do is basically take this layout out of the usual context of the page, the usual scroll of the page. And to do that, I'm going to add a new thing. I'm going to say this whole div.world is position absolute. And let's put it in a place. Let's put it, for now, in the top corner at 0 and 0. So at the moment this kind of looks the same again, but now what I can do is move this around using this position absolute. So for instance, instead of it being top or left, I could say this is something like 400 left and everything's shifted over. Now what you might notice here is this has shifted it over and it's still trying to squeeze things in. Now this is because I've got this grid layout set up and this is currently at 1 fraction each, which is kind of why it's split in 2. Now for mine, what I want to do is have 600 width images. So I'm just going to change these 1 fraction to 600, 600, 600, 600. And you'll see here that now we get this scroll being on the page. We can actually scroll around the page across and up and down. Now this isn't what we want to do, but this will give us a similar kind of effect if we wanted to do this on scroll. I can change this left back to 0 as well to get it in place, and this is scrolling in 2 directions. Basically this div.world is too big for the page, so essentially we can scroll across. Now I don't want to scroll across, I don't want to have this scroll bar at the bottom or up and down. If I scroll up and down, how do we get rid of that? So what I want to do is on my section tag that goes around this div class world, I want to cut off anything that goes outside the normal bounds of the page. So to do this, I need to cut some parts of this off. So back in my style.css, where do I want to cut this off? Well, there's 2 ways to do this. The first way is this section class panner I want to cut off. Let's do that. I'm going to say section.panner, and we'll say this has overflow hidden. So overflow hidden just means anything outside of its usual box doesn't actually scroll. But at the moment, what we can see is still a scroll on the page. Now, why is this? Well, this doesn't have a height or the width, so basically it's just kind of expanding to fit. So I'm going to add in a width 100 VW, 100% of the width of the page or the visible part of the page, and a height 100 VH, 100% of the height. Now this will still scroll, and the issue for that is basically to do with the body of the page. Basically, I don't want any part of this page to scroll. Now you may want parts on this page to actually scroll if you have like a footer or different sections on this page. So this is only if you want to have this kind of whole page not being scrolled. So I'm going to use the same idea in the body tag. So here what I'm going to say is my body tag also has a height of 100 VH and an overflow of hidden. And what this will do is it will stop any scroll. Now, just to be super clear, I'm also going to add in a width of 100 VW as well. So what we have now is a page that doesn't scroll, but we have the ability now to move things around. How do we move things around? Well, I'll take this top position or this left position and basically change these values. So for instance, if I want to shift this over by 400, I'll get this 400 pixel gap and still no scroll. If I want to shift it the other way, I will do a minus 400 pixel. Now, of course, our users are not going to go into our CSS and start changing some of these numbers. What we're going to do next is we're going to do this in JavaScript. So I've just done a quick mock-up in Figma of what is actually going on. So at the moment, what we want to do is move this red square around to basically see different parts of this world tag that we've made. Now, if I'm in the top corner up here, this will be at 0, 0, which is kind of what we would have if we went into the code and just made it 0 and 0. There we go. So this is kind of like what we have right now. And if I move my cursor around the page, we'll get to different positions. So what do we actually want to do here? Well, I want to shift this over and kind of do the opposite. So rather than going this way, I want to take the world and shift it the opposite way. So this is kind of how we would change the numbers back to minus 400. We're shifting in the opposite direction. Now, how do I get over to this bottom corner? Well, what I need to do is work out two things. I need to work out how big the whole of this world is, and I also need to work out how wide this viewable area is. Now, the reason for that is if I go from this top corner to this bottom corner, the panable area is actually this. It's not the whole of the world itself, because if this browser is bigger or smaller, this is still the area. This is based on the top left corner, not the bottom right to the top left corner. So what we are doing here is we're moving this around. So this is something to keep in mind. We're not measuring the whole of the world. We need to take into account the actual browser as well. So what do we want to do in our JavaScript? Well, essentially move this box around or move this world around depending on this box. So let's go and do that. Now back in my code, I'm going to add a new script and I'm going to call this something like pan.js. Now currently this is just empty. If I go to pan.js, there's nothing in here. So the first thing I want to do is just add it to my index.html because I want to do this on this page. So script tag in here with the source src of pan.js. Now the first thing we need to do is work out which tag to move around. So in my style.css, the thing that I'm moving around currently is section.panner space div.world. The section tag, and inside that section tag, this div.world. So let's just get that in our code. So let's call this one a constant, which is pan tag. Now, again, this is just a name that I'm giving it. It could be called anything, could be called panner, could be called something else. So here, what we're going to say is this is equal to our document, something in our document. We want to do a query selector. And what do we want to pick? In quotes, the section.panner space div.world. The thing that we're currently changing in here to move things around. So next, what do we want to do? Well, essentially, when I move my mouse across the page, I want to basically move this tag around. So let's just try and do this. Let's do this quickly. So underneath here, on the document, I want to add an event listener. What do I want to listen out for? Well, any kind of mouse movement. So in quotes, mouse move. What do we do when we have a mouse movement? Well, we want to run some code. We want to run a function, round brackets, curly brackets. Now, I just like to open these up just to make it easier to read. Now, the one thing that we can get from this event, we're adding an event listener, is the event itself. Like, where are we currently if I move my mouse around the page? So I could say event in here. Now, event is a word that I've just made up. It's just what's given to us from the browser itself. Now there's a few things that we need within this function. So back to the Figma file, we need to work out how wide and tall the world is. We need to work out how wide and tall the browser is, and we need to work out where our cursor is in relation to the browser itself. So there's 3 things that I need currently. So let's go and get them. So the first thing that I need is kind of like the window width. So I'm going to get the window width as a constant. This is equal to, in JavaScript, window.inner width. Now I also need the height as well. So let's get the window height. This is equal to window.inner height. So this is the first thing that we need. We've worked out this red box. Now the next thing we need is the world itself. How big is this area? Now we know what this tag is, so let's get the actual size from it. So back here, let's call this one a constant world width, which is how big is this big area in here. This is equal to the pan tag, the thing up here, dot, not inner width, but this one is client width. So how big is it in here? Next one we want to get is the world height, and this is unsurprisingly pan tag dot client height. So we've got now 2 things. We've got where this is and how big it is, and how big this is. But I also need to know where my mouse cursor is. So the next thing that I need is basically, where is the mouse? And what we can do is get this from the event itself. So I'm going to add in a constant called mouse x, which is equal to, from that event that's passed in from the browser, I can get the page x. And let's get a mouse y. This is equal to event.page y. So now I've got 3 different things that I know: where the mouse is, how big this size is, how big this actual area, the viewable size, actually is. So the first thing that I want to do is work out the total pan size, like how big can I actually move around? And this is basically equal to, which if I move it down there, this gray square. How big is this area that I can move in? Because notice if I'm up here, I'm now behind there. Let's move it above. If I'm up here to here, this is the whole area that I can move inside of. I can't be any bigger because this top left corner is too big. So let's go and get that. Back in my code, underneath here, we'll get a constant called pan width. And this is going to be equal to the world width minus the window width. So basically what we're trying to do here is this whole thing minus this red thing. Underneath, we're going to do pan height. And this is going to be equal to the world height minus the window height. Now, currently nothing's moving, which is totally fine. So what we need to do now is kind of work out the percentage of the way across. So what are we trying to do next? If I move my mouse around this world, basically I want to move this window relative to where this is. So let's work out the percentage of my mouse across this red box. So if I'm moving my red box, I've got my mouse moving from here. If I'm here, I want to be in this corner like that. If I'm down here, I want to be down here. So the next thing we're going to get is a percentage across. So we'll get a constant called percentage x. This is going to be equal to the mouse x divided by the pan. Is it pan width? No, it's the window width. How far are we got across this actual thing? So if I'm here, I'm at 0, and over here, 100%. Underneath, we're going to do percentage y, mouse y divided by window height. So here, I'm at 0. At the bottom, I'm at 100%. So this is kind of how much we want to move around. So we're doing a lot of kind of basic math here. We're doing some pluses, we're doing some divides, we've got some minuses in here. We're just working out the parameters of what we need. And the last thing that we need is basically we've got a percent and we know how much this gray area is. So essentially we have this shift that we can actually use now. So as I move my mouse around this area, I want to shift this world accordingly. So how do we do this? Well, now what we have is a constant called aim x. And this is going to be equal to what? Well, it's going to be equal to pan width times percentage x. This is kind of like the gray area and how much we want to shift it over by. And next, we're going to do aim y. This is the pan height times percentage y. Now, again, we're not moving anything at the moment, so nothing's actually changing. Now what we can do is move things around. So to do this, underneath, we're going to get this pan tag. And in its style sheet, .style, we're going to get the left position. And this left position is going to be equal to aim x plus pixels. So now what I should see if I move, I'm getting some movement, but notice it's the wrong way around. And the reason for that is we shifted in a negative direction. So what I'm going to change here is I'm going to take this aim x and do -1 times this. So I'm going to times it all, so when I move now, it's shifting in the opposite direction. And look, if I go over this side, it's at 0%, and over this side, it's at 100%. It's not moving up and down, so we need to move it up and down. Same thing, pan tag dot style dot top. This is equal to aim y plus px. Now px is just pixels, and again, this is doing it in the opposite direction. Let's get this aim y and multiply it by 1, or -1. There we go. So now what I'll get if I move my mouse around the page is this movement. Now, one thing that I want to add next is some kind of quick kind of tweening to it. So basically smooth movements. At the moment, if I move my mouse around, it feels very quick. So the next thing we're going to add is some smooth movements to this, but we could just keep it like this. Now, if you've watched any previous SuperArt tutorials, you might have seen this technique of tweening. And tweening is basically we want to go between different numbers. We want to have a current and an aim. So at the moment, if I'm here and I go to here, at the moment it's instant. We're kind of having this instant movement happening. But what I want to do is hold on to two different things, where it is right now and then where I'm going to move to. And I don't want to go there straight away. I want to basically go between them slowly. So this kind of process is called tweening, or going between things, if that makes a longer way to make sense. So what I'm going to do is actually hold before I move the mouse. I'm going to let there be a current X. I'm going to let there be a current Y. And then I'm going to say, let there be an aim X and let there be an aim Y. Now, currently what I'm doing in my mouse move is I'm making an aim X and an aim Y. So I'm going to get rid of this constant, because I want to track this on a kind of page level, not just when I'm moving on the mouse. So what I'm going to make these equal to begin with is just 0. This is equal to 0, this is equal to 0, this is equal to 0, and this one is equal to 0 as well. Now what we want to do is when we move around the page is some kind of animation. At the moment, this is only ever happening on mouse movement. So this won't happen if I've stopped the mouse. But obviously I want things to happen when I stop the mouse. I still want it to animate. So underneath here, what I'm going to make is a new constant. And this is going to be called animate. This is going to do something which says equals function, round brackets, curly brackets. And then I'm going to open it up. Now what I want to do is basically make the pan tag go to where it should be currently. So I'm going to take this pan tag and this style left and style top. I'm going to cut it out and I'm going to paste it in here. And I'm going to replace aim X and aim Y with current X and current Y. Now at the moment, these never update. Current X and current Y are always going to be 0. But aim X is going to change because we actually said go to this place. Now if I move my mouse around the page, obviously nothing happens right now. But what I want to do is animate this every single frame of the page. So if I'm doing 60 frames a second, animate this 60 times a second. So at the moment, this is a function that never runs. So the first thing I'm going to do is run it. Underneath, I'm going to run it on page load, animate. So this is doing nothing. It's doing just this one thing. It's saying be at 0 and 0. However, what I want to do is animate it every single frame of the page. So underneath here, once I've finished setting it up, I'm going to say request animation frame. I want to say on the next frame, do this again. In round brackets, I'm going to say what I want to do again. I want to run animate. So now this is running every single frame of the page. However, this current X and current Y never updates. So what I want to do is go between the current X and the aim X and the current Y and the aim Y. So basically I want to shift it a little bit towards where we're going to. So above here, what we're going to say is let's shift current X a little bit. For now, what I'm going to say is just plus equals 1. So what we'll see if we do current X plus equals 1 is we'll get this moving at 1 pixel every frame. So around about 60 frames a second. However, what I want to do is not just shift it off the page, which is currently what is happening. Instead, I want to get the difference between the aim X and the current X. So let's do in round brackets, the aim X minus the current X. Now, if I do this now, we'll see this moving, but it's too quick. Now, I'm just going to quickly do underneath the current Y as well. So let's plus and equals the difference between aim Y and the current Y. And what we'll get now is the same as before. Basically, we're saying as soon as we've moved aim X, the difference between the two is going to be the same as what it was previously. So basically what we have is current X working as if it's the current aim X. However, what I can do to this number, this difference between the two, is slow it down. So here what I can say is let's times this by 0.1. And let's times this one by 0.1. So now when I move around the page, we'll get this tweening effect. Now I'm going to just slow it down because I still think it's quite quick. Let's make it 0.05, 0.05. And what we get now is this much smoother effect. I'm not getting this quick effect when I go right to the other edges of the page. So what we've done here is we've added some mouse movement on this pan tag. We set up our page ready to go. We've worked out a few things here. We've worked out how big this red box is. We've worked out how big this world is. We then worked out how big this panable area is. And then what we did is we worked out a percentage of where this mouse is across the actual browser. And then what we've done is we've added some tweening in here to say, let's not go there straight away, but let's go there at just a little bit slower, 5% of the speed. And what we get is this really beautiful effect that a lot of good professional websites love to use.